Hi, this is Amy at 10thacrefarm.com, and today I'm going to talk to you about what you can do with expired seeds and excess seeds. So I used to run a community garden, and we had literally thousands of seed packets donated to us every year, which was great, and we put them to really good use. Unfortunately, this past year was the last season of the community garden. The program is not continuing, and I realized that we had thousands of seeds left over, and a lot of them date back to the 1990s. So these are old seeds. I don't want to donate them into the community because it's likely that very few of them are viable. But every spring at the community garden, we had a community seed toss, and residents of the community would come to our annual event, and we would throw all kinds of expired and excess seed packets. We would throw all the seeds into a bucket, mix them up, and we would toss them into a wild section of the garden. And you know, it was so fun for the children and the community residents to watch this wild section of the garden throughout the season to see what would pop up, what would actually grow. It was just one big surprise, and I think that's a really enjoyable experience. And so outside of the expired seeds, I collect gallon Ziploc bags of herb and flower seeds every year. Herbs and flowers, many of them are very productive as far as seeds go, and so we're talking like parsley, cilantro, dill, fennel, calendula, California poppies. These are things that produce really well in abundance. And so every year in my own yard, I like to take my own version of expired seeds, which admittedly was less than at the community garden, and mix them with my own saved herb and flower seeds, and toss those around the garden. Now, I'm a big proponent of having a wild section of a garden. So maybe you garden in a small space, maybe you have a raised bed garden. I'm a big proponent of taking one raised bed out of production every year, letting it rest, giving it a year off, and throwing in some of your surprise seed mix, and just kind of seeing what grows. It's kind of fun to have a surprise section of the garden to see what happens. And you know, a lot of times these herbs and flowers are actually very healing for the soil. It's kind of nice for the garden to have a year off. So here we are in my front yard, and I wanted to show you what I'm going to be doing this year with my extra seeds. So to your left is my front door. This is where my house is, right behind here. And over here is my front yard. And you can see that obviously my front yard is not a very typical front yard. It's very wooded. And but you can see where there's a tiny bit of grass here, and then it turns into the woods. What I'm planning on doing with a section of this forest area is I plan on turning it into a food forest. A food forest is exactly what it sounds. It's growing things that would normally grow in a forest, such as trees, shrubs, herbs, and flowers, perennial things that come back every year. But we're really focusing on edibles. So instead of flowering trees, I'm going to be producing nut and fruit trees, culinary herbs, medicinal herbs, and flowers that support the growth of those trees and shrubs in the food forest. I'm choosing, right now, my plan could change in the future, but my plan right now is to have this food forest be in the shape of a hedgerow. A hedgerow is twice as long as it is wide. So in my atypical front yard, I've marked off a space that's 60 feet long by 30 feet wide. Now, most of you are probably saying that you don't have space for 60 feet long by 30 feet wide, and that's totally fine. You can produce a hedgerow of any size as long as the ratio remains the same. So, for example, 20 feet long by 10 feet wide, 30 feet long by 15 feet wide. So as long as the ratio stays the same, you can produce a hedgerow. And the reason for that is has to do with the biodiversity that is attracted to a corridor of a certain ratio. They're looking for corridors of flowers and habitat, and so when you create that, you're creating a beneficial situation to have good fruit set and of your fruit crops, and creating a good section for biodiversity. So, so we just moved into this house a few months ago. This is a new project for me. We do have a lot on our minds to complete this year as far as projects around the new homestead. So I'm not sure when we're going to get to this food forest. I marked it off. You might be able to see in the video that I used red flags to mark off a section of the area. I know the whole area doesn't show up in the video. But some things that have to happen before we can actually start growing food there. The first thing is that we have some large dead trees that need taken out. That's probably the first thing that needs to happen. We want to incorporate rainwater from the roof of the house into this system. So that's a project that needs to be completed before we plant anything. There are some invasive species such as honeysuckle and English ivy and garlic mustard. Those are the things that I'm seeing so far. Of course, they've only been here a couple of months, so some more things might show up as spring matures. But we have to take those out. And of course, because this is a wooded area, we will be competing with wildlife such as deer, raccoons, things like that that might want whatever we're planting. So before we can plant a food forest, we do need to install a fence. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that need to happen before this becomes a food forest. But getting back to the seeds, I was interested in focusing where I threw my seeds in this area. I mean, I could just go crazy and throw these seeds all over the woods, and that's a totally fine solution also. But I thought it would be fun to come out of my front yard and be able to watch this very specific section of the woods to see what comes up from the seed toss. So the first thing I'll show you are the red flag stakes. You can get these at any home improvement store. I think that they're called utility flags. You can get them in any color, but I'm always using them for some kind of project around the yard. So these are really useful. You can reuse them again and again as long as they don't become bent. But I highly recommend them. They were really useful for me today. The second thing is I wanted to show you my seeds. This is a 5-gallon bucket. I'd say it's about half full. These are all the seeds from the expired seed packets that I dumped out today. I also added some gallon Ziploc baggies of herbs from my old yard that I collected. So I think the one that I used the most of here is garlic chives. So there's a lot of garlic chives in here. The deer don't like chives, so there's a lot of other herbs in here as well, and it's kind of good to mix in herbs with any plantings that you're doing if you have to compete with the deer, because they don't really like anything in the allium family. So we're talking chives, onions, um, garlic, things like that, leeks, things like that. Okay, so I've got my bucket here, and I wanted to kind of just show you the kinds of things, read off the kinds of things that I'm planting here. Of course, every seed toss is different. Every year I do this, I've got a different blend, but you know, the root vegetables are going to start really conditioning the soil, reaching their roots deep down, breaking up the soil for us. It's a really good primer to do this before we plant a food for us. So we've got root vegetables like beets, carrots, turnips, and radish, all kinds of different varieties of those. We've got a variety of vegetables, corn, onions, cauliflower, okra, eggplant, tomato, squash, watermelon, kohlrabi, peas, pepper, pumpkin, celery, and beans. We had all kinds of different varieties of beans and corn. We have a lot of leafy greens, which is great. Well, maybe great. We'll see. The deer might like them, but lettuce, collards, cabbage, spinach, mustard greens, watercress, endive. These are some of the greens that may or may not come up this year in this particular seed bucket. And then we've got our herbs and flowers. This is going to be really great because a lot of these, not all of them, but some of them are herbs that will self-seed. So if they do end up coming up this year, they might continue to come up in following years. They might produce enough for us to save seeds as well. And as I mentioned before, a lot of herbs and flowers are not well liked by deer, so we might actually get a crop of something. So we've got basil, lupine, anise, aster, spearmint, salvia, salsify, daisy, forget-me-not, borage, calendula, cosmos, nasturtium, pansy, parsley, and California poppy. So, obviously your mix might be different. Buzzards flying overhead. A couple of them. Anyway, I've got my seeds here. Just gonna mix them together again real quick. I'm sure the small seeds are gonna sink to the bottom. I'm gonna try to keep mixing it up as I go to make sure I get a good mix. And then I'm gonna walk around my 30 by 60 foot food forest hedgerow area and scatter these seeds. I'm not gonna do anything special. Now, I could rake up all the leaves here and get rid of some of the brush and throw these seeds down so that they make contact with the soil. I would get a better germination rate if I did that. But this is just a random seed toss. I don't want it to be a huge effort here because it's not likely that between the wildlife and the age of these seeds that I'll get a whole lot, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time babying it. If we get something, it will be awesome, and if we don't, I was happy to return these seeds to the earth. So thanks for watching. This is Amy at 10thacrefarm.com.